Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the final session of the day entitled, What Would You Do? Challenges in Hip and Knee Surgery. I'm joined up here on the podium by Alan Gross, Ken Gusty, George Hedekevich, Dickie Jones, and Leo Whitesides. I think there's about a little over 200 years of orthopedic experience. No, Alan, I didn't say you were 200 years old. I'm talking about our orthopedic experience here. All right, so we're going to have a few cases. All these cases, gentlemen, are surgical cases, so I want to know what procedure you'll do and how you do them. If we can get the slides up, I'll go ahead. Oh, there we go. Again, these are my disclosures. Here's a 66-year-old female who's got a BMI of 30, left hip pain, difficult ambulation, pain's mild in the groin, 34 years status post cemented primary left hip, and 20 years status post revision of that left hip. Activity levels light labor, and she has hypertension. She walks indoors only, ambulates with a walker. She's unable to ascend and descend stairs, and she has a fairly limited range of motion. This, by gosh, is her presenting x-ray. Dickie.
By gosh, by golly. Well, that certainly is an old prosthesis that's been in there for quite some long time. It's going to be somewhat of an issue getting that thing out, but I think that...
So the things I'd like you to talk about are you going, what kind of exposure are you going to do? Are you going to do an osteotomy here?
I'm going to do an extended trochanteric osteotomy because that's going to get me down to do the distal part of it. Going to maybe get those wires out, maybe not. I'm not going to go digging around for them a whole lot. It looks like that acetabulum is well fixed. We may be able to cement a new liner into that acetabulum, and I would be using an extensive Wagner-type stem after I got all the cement out and put this in as a press-fit hip.
Alan, do you do the osteotomy from front to back or back to front?
We do it both ways, depending on whether we take off the choke. Here we would do it from the back. We do an ETO, because that cement mantle is absolutely solid.
But do you do it, the way you do it, don't you retain the posterior capsule, if I recall?
We retain the posterior capsule and the external rotators. We call it a modified ETO.
Okay. Leo, how do you do it?
I just do a posterior approach and do my best to preserve the greater trochanteric attachment to the rest of the osteotomy. That's a big issue here. But I do completely open the posterior capsule to remove everything from there.
Would anyone just take out the top piece and then make a small window distally and knock this stem out?
You could. It'd just take you a lot longer.
No. So everybody's committed to doing a extended trochanteric osteotomy.
Yep.
Do you ever have to use a plate or anything to reinforce that osteotomy?
I think in this case, you may get a fracture at the vastus tubercle there because it's quite osteolytic.
Right.
Yeah. And when we get those, we still treat it like an ETO. Rarely would we put a cortical strut there, but very, very rarely.
Well, I assume that all of you would do this standard laboratory profile. This is what I did. Would anybody go any further? Would anybody aspirate this hip? Ken?
Well, this patient was apparently pain-free, and you have a mechanical problem you can see there on the x-ray. The only thing that was abnormal is the sed rate. I guess you could be criticized with an abnormal test if you didn't do an aspiration. So if you did one, I wouldn't criticize you doing an aspiration, but I think you got a mechanical reason why that's failed, and a sed rate that's really not consistent.
All right, show of hands. Who on the panel is going to aspirate the hip? Okay. Do you aspirate more knees, would you say? Yes, so that's a consensus.
It's easy.
It's right there.
Because it's easy, it's right there. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can get to a hip pretty easily in the office, and I'll do it there.
Yeah, so my point on this case was that I believe the best way to approach this case is with an ETO. There's a variety of different ways to do them, and the results, generally, union rates are fairly high. I, unfortunately, not quite as talented as some of you, and I did wind up fracturing that fragment, so I wound up having to put on a plate, as you see here, I used those sort of isoelastic cables. I think the other point is, and I would like to know if you routinely do this. Once I do an ETO like this, I always put one cable right below, as you see there, that last one at the bottom, before I drive in that Wagner-type stem. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And the reason I like these kind of cables is I can actually put it through a loop right through that hole of that prosthesis and pull that plate, suck that down, and I don't have to worry about the fretting of metal.